Welcome to Veterans Archives, where your story matters. We are dedicated to preserving the stories of our nation's heroes for future generations. Today is Wednesday, February 26th, 2025. We're talking with George Durayton, who served in the United States Army. So, good afternoon, George. How are you?
I'm very well.
Well, good.
Very fortunate.
Yes.
Yes, less than 2 weeks ago I had a stroke, and so I'm recovering very well and very happy about it.
Well, and it's kind of amazing what medicine can do today, and how if you catch it quick, you can recover pretty well from it.
Yes, since World War II, they've made remarkable recoveries and discoveries about medicines.
Absolutely. So today I'm just going to ask you a few questions, and we're going to talk about your life history, basically. And I'm going to start out with the simplest of questions, and that is, when and where were you born?
What?
When and where were you born?
I was born in Butterworth Hospital in April 17th, 1930.
Okay. And so have you lived in this area most of your life then?
Yes.
Okay.
On the north side. Well, I was born in Grand Rapids,
Mm-hmm.
and then I grew up in Comstock Park, and I raised my family in Caledonia. So that's where I have lived most of the time.
Okay. And can you tell me, what was it like growing up? Did you have brothers and sisters?
I had 4 brothers and 2 sisters, and my mother was married twice, and so I had a half brother and a half sister that were older than me.
Okay, so lots of kids in your family.
Yes.
And were you the oldest or the youngest? Where did you fall in?
I was the oldest of my mother's second marriage.
Uh-huh. Okay. And what can you tell me about your mother? Anything come to mind when you think about your mom?
Well, if we can go back a little bit further,
Yes.
my grandmother, her family, including my mother, traveled from down by Columbus, Ohio, to South Carolina in a covered wagon, and then came back to Michigan. My mother never talked much about it, but I had an aunt that did, and my youngest brother died a year ago, and he had a trunk that they carried their clothes in while they were traveling. That was very small.
Mm-hmm.
He said they had 2 children that died on the way to South Carolina, or South Dakota.
Okay. That's quite a history.
Yes, and my mother never talked about it. My grandmother on my mother's side, I lived on 3 Mile Road past the East Beltline, and one time my sister and I walked in here to see my grandmother, and she worked in the office in the old original building.
Mm-hmm.
You entered from Coit, and she bought us an ice cream cone, and that's the only time I remember ever seeing her. Where we lived, there were no buses, and you had to have an automobile to get there. So she couldn't come, and my parents did go and see her, and they talked about it. But she must have been a very well-educated person, and my mother took classes at the University of Michigan, which she never told me about. It was my aunt that did that.
Was your aunt sort of the family historian?
Pardon?
I said, was your aunt kind of the family historian? Did she keep these stories?
Well, she talked about it more than any of the other aunts or anyone. My mother never talked about it.
Okay. So what was it like growing up then? So were you in like kind of, was this a rural area at the time?
Very much so. And it was, of course, during the Depression, and it was not easy life. It was very difficult. I remember one time we had breakfast, and we had one piece of toast, and my older sister took two of them, and I told my mother, and she said, my sister said, well, I already bit off from each one of them. And so my mother was disgusted, and she threw her piece down on the table, and I picked it up and ate it. And then she said to my sister, well, I have to eat something. I have a baby to feed. And so she took one of the pieces of toast. But that was our breakfast.
This is a very hard time in our history. So, were you able to go to school then?
Yes.
Okay.
Went to Orchard View, which is on 3 Mile Road, just a half a mile before you get to the East Belt Line.
And was that a school that was that kindergarten through graduation, or?
2 rooms, and I went to the 8th grade.
Okay.
The 1st to the 4th, and the 5th to the 8th.
And then where did you go after 8th grade?
After what?
After the 8th grade, did you go to like a high school?
Well, you could. None of my family did.
Okay. So then what did you do after the 8th grade? What did you do when you got done with school?
Well, I didn't do much. I worked on a resort up by Greenville one summer, and then right after that I was drafted.
Okay.
That was during the Korean thing, and after I did that, I drove truck, and it paid much better than working in a furniture factory or something. And the last 12 years that I worked, I drove for Ryder truck rental.
Okay.
And I won the Driver of the Year contest. There were 70,000 drivers in the United States and Canada that were eligible, but it took in your entire life, not just your driving. And I always worked my entire adult life in the church. And it was the week between Christmas and New Year's, and I was down by Indianapolis, and I had the radio on in the truck, and it was either 2 above or 2 below zero. And then along Route 69, there was a car stopped, and about 2 feet in front of it was a woman sitting on the snowbank where the plow had plowed the snow. And so I went up to the interchange and turned around and come back and put on my coat and everything and walked across the interstate. And I asked her what was the matter, and she said she run out of gas. And I reached down and took her hand, and it was mushy. And so we got her to the hospital in Muncie, and they said if her body temperature had dropped 2 more degrees, she would have died. And the next day I called the police department to see if they knew who she was and if she was still alive. And they knew who she was, and they said, "Do you want to talk to her?" And so they switched me over to the Muncie Hospital, and she had a daughter about 15 years old, and she answered the phone. And then on Monday, or might have been Tuesday again, I was dispatched and came down this way again, and I went to her house to see her. And she said that the doctor had been examining her hands, and he wouldn't talk to her. And that day, he had felt of her hands, and along here there was feeling. And so he knew he wouldn't have to take her hands off. And then he talked to her and said that if he had to take her hands off, he didn't want to know her.
Oh.
So that's why he had not been talking to her. But she had been a hairdresser, and her hands were not good enough to do that anymore. So she was going to be a bookkeeper. And
So
that was the end of my seeing her. But,
well, you saved her life, for
Yes.
sure, yes.
yeah, it's just no telling how many vehicles had gone by her, but
Yeah.
none of them stopped.
Well, I want to go back a little bit and talk about your time in the Army, if that's okay.
Okay.
So you were drafted to during the Korean War.
Yes.
Where'd you go to basic training at?
In Camp Carson in Colorado.
Okay. And what was that like for you, the basic training?
Well, I felt that it was just a waste of my time, a waste of my life. But Colorado is a beautiful place,
It is.
and I enjoyed being there. And then I moved around a lot. I went to the East Coast and did a small arms school.
So were you an armorer then? What was your job in the Army?
Well, I was in the artillery,
Okay, okay.
and today they wear earplugs, and then they didn't. And with my position when firing the cannon, I had my left side to the cannon, and now I am deaf in the left ear. But
So you were on the East Coast teaching small arms?
small arms school,
Okay.
and then I went back to Camp Carson, and then just a couple days later, we went to Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah to test some nerve gas that was left over from the First World War. And we stayed there quite a while and demonstrated and still used the cannons. But the day that we used the cannons, we wore a gas mask, and they said it was good for 30 seconds with that nerve gas. And the best way to tell if there was any around was if people around you were dropping dead.
That's not a really great test.
No, and we did fire the cannons, and then we run and jumped right in the back of the trucks and left.
Oh.
And I was not present when they recovered the cannons, but I guess none of them leaked. We never heard about it.
Yeah. And so what other things did you do in your? So you were in the Army for 2 years.
Yes.
Okay. What other things did you do while you were there?
Yes, what did I do? I moved around a lot. I came back to Colorado Springs, and because I had gone to the small arms school, the artillery was not authorized my training then. So I went to Kansas and spent the rest of my time there. We were training the 90-day wonders. We had the first 160 hours with them, and it was mostly the weapons that we taught them.
So when you say 90-day wonders, you're talking about the new officers?
Yes.
Yeah. A lot of people listening might not know that, but yeah, so I'm familiar with that term. So they would go to school and come out and be officers in a very short period of time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, well, we spent the first 160 hours with them,
Uh-huh.
and then they moved on, still in Kansas, but in the same camp, but we didn't have them anymore.
Okay. Is that what you did for the rest of your time then? Was train them?
That's where I finished my 2 years. That was
Okay.
there in Kansas.
And then where did you go when you left the Army?
I came back to Grand Rapids, and I got a job driving truck with the Capital Lumber and Wrecking Company. Well, I had worked there before I went in service too. And so when I came out, I worked for Breed's Delivery Service. And then they went out of business, and I worked for Blodgett Uncrated Furniture. And we went primarily from Grand Rapids in Chicago to the East Coast, and a lot of loads going into New England.
Okay. And how long did you work there?
I think 20 years.
Oh, okay.
And they went out of business. And then I went to work for a bakery out of Atlanta, Georgia, but they had their offices here in the old Oven Fresh building. And then we handled frozen products, and they were at Michigan National Storage. So that's where I went and got loaded every week. And then I delivered primarily in part of Indiana, Illinois, and occasionally down in Missouri and up into Wisconsin. But it was just a 1 week deal. And I picked up a lot of shortening to haul back from St. Louis, Missouri. And a man from Denmark bought the business, and he laid everybody off and went to Manpower to get the help.
Oh, so he hired temporary workers then after that?
Pardon?
He hired temporary workers?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And needless to say, he went out of business because those people couldn't come in and know what to do, and so he closed it up.
And where did you go from there?
Then I went to the bakery.
Okay.
Yes, out of Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay.
And then I worked there 12 years until I retired. And we made products for all the in-store bakeries, and a big customer was the Original Cookie Company.
I'm very familiar with them.
Well, they're gone.
Right.
Mrs. Fields bought them out, and that was $12 million a year that we did in high profit business with them. And so then the bakery out of Atlanta, they went out of business, and that's when I retired.
Okay. What? You remember what year you retired?
92.
Okay. All right. If you don't mind me asking, were you ever married, George?
Yes, I was married. I got married while I was in the service, and it was a woman from Comstock Park that I went to school with. And so we got married and had a very good life. Raised our children, and we had one that died at 28 months, the first one a girl.
Oh.
But we had a very good life, and I worked for the bakery. I worked the food shows, and I started with the Gordon Food Show here, and then we went over quite a bit of the country. In Missouri, the food show was it was California, because it was San Francisco one year and Los Angeles the next year. And then we had the school show one year, and it was in Las Vegas. And with the truck, it would take you 5 days to drive back to Grand Rapids. And then the next show was in Los Angeles, and it would take 5 days to drive back there. And it was just 10 days between shows. So we stayed in Las Vegas, and I told him I would not do the food shows unless I could take my wife with me.
Mm-hmm.
So during that 10 days, we went up into Utah and did some sightseeing. Very good.
How long were you married?
64 years, almost.
Wow. Okay.
And my wife died in 24/16. She was not sick very long and just died.
Okay. How many children did you have?
We had 6, but the first one was a girl, and she only lived 28 months.
Uh-huh.
And we had a girl, a boy, and a girl and a boy. And our youngest one married a woman that he never should have married, and he was doing well and had bought a house and his car and things, and then her mother got sick, and they didn't have insurance to take care of it. So his wife would take all the money that he had. She'd say, "You got no heart." If he tried to keep some money for anything.
Mm-hmm.
And he got a job. He worked for a truck wash, and he got a job on the weekends going to New Jersey and picking up soap and bringing it back. And she took all the money that he took her in advance so that he could run the turnpike all the way, and he just didn't have any money because it was her thing that you got no heart. And so he lost his house and car. They got a divorce, and in the end he committed suicide.
I'm very sorry to hear that.
Well, there's no complete answers for it,
Right.
but I believe that it was totally her fault, because he was doing very well until her mother got sick.
Yeah. What about the rest of your children? Are they all, what are they doing now?
Well, like I said, we had 6, and the first one died at 28 months. And then the youngest boy, there was a girl and a boy, a girl and a boy, a girl and a boy. And just a little over a year ago, the second boy died. And the last one had committed suicide. And the youngest one, he lives full-time in Florida. And the older daughter that was left, she died She had one or two children that lived in on the East Coast. I think it was Virginia, and she went out there to see them, and she died. And it was very difficult, but
Yeah, I can't even imagine. That's got to be difficult for you.
yes.
Yeah.
Um,
So how long have you been here at the Veterans Home?
a year ago in August.
And are you enjoying it here? That been good for you, or?
It's as good as any place can be, I think.
Yeah.
Like I said, we grew up in Comstock Park, and there were, I think, 4 taverns in Comstock Park. There were none in North Park, and veterans from here went over there to do their drinking, and that was very much the opinion of them, was drinking and smoking cigarettes.
Yeah.
And even before I came here, why they said that they have earned the right to smoke. And I thought by the same standards, I have earned the right to breathe clean air. And so I had a entirely different picture of veterans.
You feel differently now than you did
Yes.
before? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. Nobody really smokes hardly anymore.
No.
Yeah.
And when I was growing up, my father smoked. My mother never did. And most everyone I knew smoked. I had a cousin that would take a puff on a cigarette and then let it out of his mouth and draw in through his nose and get all that tobacco smoke back in his nose. And I don't think he's alive anymore.
Yeah. I think that cigarettes have killed a lot of people.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, George, you know, it's been interesting learning about you and your family and your life and all of the things that you've done. You know, is there anything that you would like to share that you haven't shared?
Well, the Ryder trophy, there was one more thing. Like I said, we had worked for a bakery, or I did, and most in-store bakeries got a shipment about every 3 weeks, so you could not ship them product that would expire in a month. And they had a pig farmer that used to come and pick that up, and much to his dislike, I single-handedly detoured that to to feed people anyway. I can't remember what the name of it was, but it went to feed people. It was a food bank, and parents, when they were not working, could go there and get food. So a detour, or just a whole bunch of bakery products to that instead of to the pig farmer.
Because the food was safe. You could eat it.
Oh,
You just couldn't
yes.
sell it anymore, right?
Yes, yes, because we couldn't send it to a customer if it would expire within a month.
Right.
So it was a good product, but you just couldn't send it to a customer.
Well, do you feel like you've kind of led a life of service then? I mean, I feel like you've done things for people, for others.
I knew a poem that's I shall pass this way but once. If there is any good that I may do, any wrong that I may right, may I not postpone it or prolong it, for I may not pass this way again. And I feel that that was much of my life. That from the church that I worked in from the time I got out of service until well after I retired. And after I retired, we spent 6 months in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas and 5.5 months in Ludington. And I still went on with working in the church.
Mm-hmm. Now, what sort of things, after retirement, what sort of things did you do with the church then?
Well, I was a Sunday school superintendent. I taught Sunday school, and I was a deacon in the congregational church, which is the first position under the minister.
Mm-hmm.
And if the minister isn't there, why, then it was my job to have pulpit supply for if it's 1 week or if you were between ministers.
It's a very important job.
Yes. Yes, and it's strange. In the congregational church, it was a deacon, and then you had trustees that were in charge of the building and grounds.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Methodist church, a deacon was what the trustees were in the congregational church, and was in Texas, and I was asked if I would be a deacon, and the woman that asked me said they never do anything. Well, I'm not one not to do anything. And so I remodeled the front of the church. One of the first times I went there, there was a member of the choir coming back down to the congregation setting,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a railing that just sat on 2 posts, and this man was 92, and he lifted up on it, and I come off, and he fell over backwards, and his son taught the choir, and he said, "You just decided to sit down for a while," because I think his father passed out for a minute.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I remodeled that front of the church, and we lost 2 pews in the front because I increased the size of the area where the choir sat, had better steps instead of 8 inches where they were 5 inches. So that turned out well.
You set the bar pretty high for the next deacon, right?
Well, everybody has their own way.
That's true.
I was discharged not too long after that. Well, no, I went to Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
No, that was after I was retired and in Texas.
Yeah.
Yes, and then, yes, I came back here and my wife was sick and the doctor said she could not travel back and forth anymore. So she lived about a year and a half after that and was never herself.
Yeah.
But we had a very good life.
That's good.
Yes. Yes. So many people get married and they just don't take it serious, and they get married and a week later they get a divorce. We had a long, good life. We were able to do many things together. So I'm very thankful for that.
Well, and I'm happy that you got to have that. That's
Yes.
so very important. So, George, as we wrap up our conversation today, I want to ask you one more question, and that is, if someone is listening to this years from now, and they're listening to your story and hearing about your life, what would you like for them to take away from that? What message would you have for somebody?
I think the poem that I shall pass this way but once. If there is any good that I may do, or any wrong that I may right, may I not postpone it or forsake it, for I may not pass this way again. So if there's something good that you can do, any wrong that you may right, do it.
Thank you for watching the story of one of our nation's heroes on Veterans Archives, where your story matters. We are dedicated to preserving these stories for future generations.